Welcome, everyone. Thank you for making it on this not very cold night, but making it here tonight. Glad to see some familiar faces, student, faculty, and also community member, and also particularly nonviolence international activist. And I could say the old activist, old as a veteran, that you don't. It's an honor to see you guys here. Thank you. Thank you for making it. In conflict resolution, we say that when you come to analyze a conflict, you have to understand the different parties. That's one of the basics we do. That's one of the main, actually, foundation to get to understanding, a deeper understanding of conflict, is to know the root causes and the perspective of different parties involved in. And from not only during October 7, but also before October 7 and the war in Gaza, it is obvious and clear to me has been that the discourse and narrative that we hear and we listen to every day, at least in this town, and also the mainstream media, have incredibly demonized not only Palestinian and not only those who support the Palestinian self-determination, but also any Palestinian political party or any Palestinian movement. And Hamas probably is the most demonized group among the Palestinian political as well as military factions. And also following what has been taking place here in terms of incitement against anything has to do with Hamas. Many people get scared even to talk about it or to engage in a conversation about it. So we thought, or I thought in general with Michael from Nonviolence International and also other faculty at AU, that we ought to provide a space where we can engage in an open and honest and critical conversation about Hamas and what does it mean and why is it important to understand it. And actually we have probably the experts on this with the title of the book, Why Does It Matter to Understand Hamas, particularly these days. And that's really the background behind this. It's our interest to better understand and deepen our comprehension and understanding of this conflict, particularly during this day. And I'm not going to talk much about the Gaza and the situation in Gaza right now. I'm assuming that most of you, if not all of you, are aware of the massive suffering, destruction in the Gaza as well as in the West Bank as a result of the Israeli military campaign. And the images of the news have been all over the media and social media. The scale of destruction of the human life, physical and the human, is very visible to every one of us. In many ways also this event more appropriate because of this. We can't talk about Hamas today without mentioning our President Trump, who's the cold entrepreneur mind, who offered to buy Gaza and resettle, and he continue every day to make such outrageous statements of what he's going to do with the Palestinians, send them into unknown destination, and yet make it a tourist destination of Gaza. Just, dealing with it as somebody, I can't even find the words to describe the feeling of many of us when we hear this discourse on this narrative. And needless to say that, many Palestinian and Gazan and many other around the world have dismissed this colonial capitalist approach that denies the basic inherent rights of Palestinian for self-determination. And unfortunately, the danger of it is really it legitimizes the mentality of expulsion, transfer, and mass killing as a way to settle conflict, not only for Palestinian, but also for many other people around the globe who are fighting for their freedom and other conflict area. But again, the topic of whether Hamas existence or non-existence in the post-war in Gaza is very sensitive, and yet it's central. And I'm hoping today we can delve into it, a little bit into it, by the two experts here in this panel. And we can look at some ideology, strategy, and also history that Hamas has deployed in this conflict, or in this history of this conflict. But beyond the demonization of Hamas, we can also see that there is, on the other policymakers and communities who have expressed their support for Hamas and its armed campaign resistance against the Israeli military. So we do have two sides very clear to this conflict: those who demonize Hamas, and the mass number of people who continue to support Hamas, even after what has happened in Gaza during this war. Hamas, for many others, especially in the southern hemisphere, has become the symbol of resistance and survival of the war crime campaign carried by the Israel in the past 16 months. But regardless where you stand here in this room, or our guests also online, it is clear to everyone that even if Hamas military capacity is destroyed or dismantled, its ideology will not disappear that easily. It's an illusion to think that Hamas can disappear from the Palestinian national movement completely without eliminating the root causes which enable Hamas to emerge as a powerful force in Palestinian resistance movement since 1980s. Because of this dynamic, we're really hoping that our community can have this space to have a critical discussion and pose some critical question about Hamas and its role in the past in the Palestinian context, particularly since the war in Gaza. Question like, what are the circumstances that led to the Hamas to carry out its October 7 attack? Do Hamas current leader willing to accept two-state as a permanent solution? To what extent Hamas has blocked reconciliation with Fatah? How did Israeli government policy since 2007 have led to further divide between Hamas and Fatah? Will Hamas accept arrangements in post-war in Gaza without being around the table or in the leadership? And one more question, will Hamas accept internal Palestinian evaluation or review of its accountability of what has happened as a result of the October 7 attack? Is the price of 60,000 Palestinians killed and 80% of the houses destroyed, is that in the cost calculation of Hamas something that is still worth engaging in? That is probably one of the most difficult questions that Hamas have to address, not only now, but I think in the future and in the history of this conflict. And should that conversation take place? When will it take place publicly? I know it's been taking place behind the closed doors among many Palestinians and also Arabs and others who stood beside Hamas for many years. And that question of the cost is really very difficult for Hamas to answer at this point, but we'll see if there is something like that will open. As I said, Helena Cobban is probably one of the experts most known who have met and written and spent a long time in the region and met with many Palestinian leaders. Her book is Understanding Hamas, and why that matters is really timely. This is, I think, the second time she speaks about it here in town, and it's very timely and also very inspiring to read the details and the nuances in this book. She's a writer and a researcher in international affairs who lives in Washington, D.C. since '84. Cambridge UP published her seminal study, The Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO. 3 of her 6 other sole author books dealt with political and strategic developments in the Arab-Israeli theater or conflict. The rest with more global matters. For 17 years, she contributed a regular column on the globe issues of the Christian Science Monitor, and also Al-Hayat in London. She had written about the breaks of the nationality by Palestinians, Zionism question, Jewish state, And in 2016, she was co-founder of Just World Education, which she's now served as the president of that platform or organization. Her current main writing platform is Globalities. In late 2024, she co-authored the book that we're focusing on, Understanding Hamas and Why It Matters. Jonathan, on my left, will be, Jonathan is one of the people who, as I said, veteran of the Nonviolence International, a fighter for the nonviolence movement, with, of course, our colleagues and friends and mentor Mubarak Awad, who's here. Jonathan as a co-founder with this organization, Nonviolence International, he's a well-known international human rights attorney and has established himself as a prominent speaker on nonviolence. He's also the co-founder of Palestinian human rights group Al-Haq, president of the board of Bethlehem Bible College, and executive director of the Friends Sabil in North America. He's the author of many articles and books, including Beyond the Two States and The Truth Shall Set You Free. Two books are also outside, in addition to the main book here tonight with Helena Cobban. I'm really honored and delighted that they have took the time and they join us, and we'll give Helena the chance to share with us her book, her reviews, and any responses to this question that I posed. And then we'll listen after 25 minutes to Jonathan comments. And I'm hoping we're going to get about half an hour discussion with you. Thank you all, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, Jonathan, and everybody who has helped to organize this. It's really in the spirit of our late friend Abdulaziz Saeed, and so it's a good thing to be able to have this discussion here. I know a lot of people are very wary of discussing this thing that some people call it the H word, because you don't want to get picked up by, you know, people listening into your conversations or whatever. Just a note about Jonathan Kuttab. I remember when I was part of a Quaker delegation and we came to Jerusalem in 2002. Jonathan received us, and it was an excellent conversation that got recorded in our book. And after that, I remember seeing with great interest the debate you had with your brother between one state and two state, because honestly, I've had the same debate with my spouse, one state versus two state. And actually, there's not any real right answer. So anyway, Hamas, yeah. I'm assuming that everybody here, maybe it's a wrong assumption, thinks that people under foreign military occupation have the right to resist by all means necessary within the bounds of international humanitarian law, and that people suffering under colonial domination have the same right, which, you know, both those rights are enshrined in international law. And if you talk to people from Denmark or Norway or France, they will certainly agree with the first proposition, that people under foreign military occupation have the right to resist. And everybody in the global south agrees that people under colonial domination have the right to resist. So that leaves a kind of a small number of people who don't believe that, who believe that, you know, it's okay to overrun other people's countries, whether through foreign military occupation or through colonial domination. And at this point, I do have to acknowledge that we are sitting here in the traditional land of the Piscataways, and that our country here was also created through colonial violence of unspeakable magnitude. So it makes me humble. It makes me recognize the privilege that I have as a white person who has benefited from this project here in this country, to talk about our friends, our brothers and sisters from Hamas. Now, Hamas stands for the Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, the Islamic resistance movement. There had been a history of resistance in Palestine since the 1930s, or even before that, to British colonial domination, and then to Israeli colonial domination and expansionism. And so there've been a whole series of resistance movements, some of which I've written about before, including in my book on the PLO, those were mainly secular movements. Although Fatah itself, which is the core of the PLO, has a very strong Islamist streak in it. But so then in 1993, there they were on the White House lawn, the PLO, Yasser Arafat, Abu Ammar, shaking hands with Yitzhak Rabin, and they concluded the Oslo Agreement, which was a temporary agreement, and Palestinians are right to be wary of temporary agreements, let me say. And we're now in a very tricky situation in Gaza right now, where Hamas is saying that the Israelis have reneged on their commitments under the ceasefire agreement. And so Oslo was supposed to, within 5 years, lead to a final status peace agreement that would end the conflict between the state of Israel and a Palestinian state. So actually that agreement was supposed to be concluded by 1999, and it wasn't. And here we are, and we still have this thing in Ramallah, which is called the full name is the Palestinian Interim Self-Governing Authority. It is not an independent Palestinian state, and the negotiations for the independent Palestinian state have gone nowhere and are currently going nowhere. So it was not surprising that in the 1990s, questions amongst the Palestinians about this process arose more and more. And at the forefront of this questioning was this relatively young organization, Hamas, which had been founded only in December of 1987. And it came out of the Palestinian chapter of the broader regional Muslim Brotherhood organization, which takes on many forms in different parts of the Arab world. The Palestinian and Egyptian forms of the Muslim Brotherhood, by and large, eschewed politics. They, for a long time, it's not that they didn't participate in politics, but they thought that the way to liberation, to realization of the Arab Muslim people's rights was by concentrating on right living. And, you know, I'm a Quaker. I'm very familiar with this idea that you can have a kind of a quietist approach, that if you just make your community as godly as possible, then you can create the kingdom of God on earth or something. And then there are Quakers who are really out there, and I'm probably one of those, okay? So, and, you know, for a long time, there were Quakers who owned enslaved persons, and then luckily the Quakers came along who said, no, that's a really bad idea. So, you know, there are good and bad in all religions, let's say. Hamas questioned that whole gradualist approach and pressed for, well, first of all, to defend Palestinian lands and holy places and lives and livelihoods. And we had the second intifada that broke out in 2000. Many grassroots people from Fatah worked then and continue to work with Hamas. It's not like there's a strict divide between the seculars and the Islamists. In fact, in most families, I want to say, most Muslim Palestinian families, you find people who support you know, the left, you find people who support the secular center, and you find people who support the Islamists. And they talk around the table, and, you know, they support each other, and they argue, and whatever. Every single family practically is like that. So I'm going to just leap forward to October of 2023, when, no, I won't. I'll have a quick stop by 2018, when the people of Gaza, which for reasons I can go into if you want, has always been the crucible of the Palestinian national movement. The people of Gaza decided they were so fed up with this siege that they'd been living under that they wanted to organize something called the Great March of Return, which was a quintessential mass civilian action. Largely speaking, after prayers every Friday, they would go out from the various mosques and gathering places and try to walk toward the border, which is not a border. It's an armistice line from 1949. It's where the Zionist militias had succeeded in pushing forward to when the armistice, actually they did it even after the armistice, they pushed forward even more. So the Great March of Return tried to do this every week for, I want to say, more than a year. And the Israeli military positioned snipers on berms outside the armistice line and would just shoot at the kneecaps and very frequently kill people. But the Great March of Return resulted in more than 200 deaths of Palestinians under these circumstances, and the amputation and you know, severe wounding of many thousands more. So to the extent that you have, you know, entire football leagues in Gaza of amputees, you know. So it wasn't working, let's say. It was so damaging for the society. And I guess at that point, a lot of people in the resistance movement, and this is not just Hamas, there is a broader resistance movement in Gaza, decided that this mass nonviolent organizing just couldn't break the logjam. So clearly from around then, Yahya Sinwar and his people in the military wing of Hamas in Gaza started preparing for a very big operation. And their intention, and I think this has been proven quite clearly both by the record of what happened on October 7th and by testimonies from Hamas people. Their intention was to seize hostages, military hostages, like they had Gilad Shalit earlier and a few other military hostages, in order to exchange them for some of the many thousands of Palestinians, Hamas and other Palestinian activists in Israeli jails. And my view on this is that it was catastrophically successful. They did such meticulous planning, they were able to completely disable the entire surveillance system that ringed the concentration camp that Gaza was. And once the surveillance system, because the Israelis had created all this like high-tech wizardry that they didn't even any longer after 2018 have to have the soldiers on the berms with the sniper rifles. They had automated systems that when they sensed somebody coming near the armistice line would automatically fire from elevated machine guns. You know, so it might have been an animal, it might have been a child, it might have been whoever, but you know, it was all automated. So the technical brilliance of Hamas was to be able to blind and disable that automated control system. And then they bust through the armistice line. in many places, I think around 40 places. But the reason I say it was catastrophically successful is that it wasn't just the organized squads of Hamas and the other resistance movements who went out and actually very speedily managed to take over the local brigade headquarters of the IDF and the whole of the Southern Command headquarters of the IDF and all these very central IDF control nodes, but the hoi polloi of Gaza flooded out. I mean, what's not to like? You know, they bust the walls of the concentration camp, and all the young men wanted to go out, and they went back to grandma's farm. They went back to, you know, where their auntie had said there was a little shop that she used to own. They just really wanted to have the right of return and to undertake it. But along the way, they looted. They created havoc because they had been closed up in the concentration camp for so very long. And I guess they gathered that the idea was to take hostages. So a lot of these people took hostages, civilian hostages, as well as the military. Now, the military are the ones who are still being held. And they were held much more, in a much more disciplined way by Hamas and its allies in the resistance movement, which is basically Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and a little bit of Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades from Fatah. But, you know, so the military squads took military hostages, but the hoi polloi took, you know, whoever. And then we had the Israeli military in complete disarray operationally, and like a gut punch to their whole concept of deterrence, you know, which they talk about endlessly. And many helicopter pilots came back and were just firing Hellfire missiles, as Yoav Gallant and others have recently recognized, firing their US-made Hellfire missiles at anything that moved, which included a lot of these hoi polloi people from Gaza, some of the military people from Gaza, but a lot of the people, just regular Israelis, including at the rock festival or you know, the music festival. If you look at the scenes of the cars of the people who were at the festival, it's just gut-wrenching how many people were killed and the kind of the firepower required to do that. So almost immediately, the Israeli propaganda machine went into high gear. And we had the story of the 40 beheaded babies, or were they burned? Well, it's unclear. But anyway, clearly, Joe Biden was convinced that there were 40 babies beheaded or burned. And he talked about it. He said, I've seen the video. Nobody has seen the video. Clearly, they showed him something that disturbed him deeply. But then we also heard about, you know, Hamas going in there with the intention of mass rape. Again, no evidence has come forth about this, but it is widely believed in the political echelon in this country. And the reason these demonizing slurs got such wide acceptance is because people have been conditioned in this country to accept as truth anything that the Israelis say. So in March of last year, our organization, Just World Educational, decided we needed to take on this question of the demonization of Hamas, which was clearly acting as a major impediment to the very urgent diplomatic contacts which needed to take place. And we now know that either in December of 23 or in May of 24, or sometime between then, the outlines of this ceasefire for hostages agreement were agreed. Everybody knew what it would consist of by and large, you know, the 3 6-week phases and blah, blah, blah. But Netanyahu didn't want to implement it. He backtracked many times, and every time there was a backtracking, they would come out with more demonization of Hamas in order to justify that. So for us, as Just World Educational, this was a radical and urgent call for effective diplomacy. In order to have effective diplomacy, people need to try to understand this organization, Hamas. Otherwise, we're just going to be trapped in not having effective diplomacy. So from my perspective, I'm really glad that on January 19th, Donald Trump's envoy finally said, there's the deal's been sitting there for months and months and months, do it. Which Joe Biden didn't do and didn't do and didn't do. But still, we have the need to understand Hamas a lot better. So we've seen Hamas over this past couple of weeks performing on its commitments under the ceasefire agreement. They have ceased fire. They have released hostages. And Israel has released many captives from their prisons, has not entirely ceased fire in Gaza, and has released some of the promised aid shipments, but not all of them. And that is why right now, today, Hamas said that they're going to suspend the release of hostages until the Israelis comply with the agreement. So we still think that it's really important for the public in this country, and hopefully also the political echelon, to gain a much richer understanding of Hamas. What we did was, in May of last year, we held a series of 5 webinars. They were co-hosted by myself and my fellow board member, Rami Khouri, who is a very distinguished former editor of the Jordan Times, Palestinian Christian from Nazareth, currently living in Boston, lived in Lebanon for a very long time. Wonderful person to work with. So Rami and I invited 5 world-class experts on Hamas. 3 of them are Europeans. No, 3 of them are Palestinians and 2 of them are Europeans. And we presented this series of webinars, which got, really good viewership and gained legs. And we made transcripts. And people said you should make the transcripts into a book. So we did. And, some people like to learn by watching a webinar. Some people like to learn by reading a book. Now you can do both, which is great. And so when we put the book together, we also put in some really, I think, useful appendices, not just the Hamas 1988 charter that everybody talks about, but also the Hamas 2017 revision of the charter, which doesn't get talked about so much, and other vital documents and a timeline and a sort of dramatis personae and a glossary and all things. So the idea is that you don't have to be a specialist to read the book and gain a richer understanding of Hamas. So I'll quickly run through who our 5 experts were and the main takeaway I took from each of them. The first one was a wonderful Italian specialist called Paola Caridi, who spent, I think, from about 2003 through 2012, she was living in Jerusalem, working as a journalist. She now also teaches at the University of Syracuse, Syracuse, Italy, not Syracuse, whatever. So that was a seminal period, because that was the period in which Hamas actually laid down its arms in 2005 in order to take part in the legislative elections for the Palestinian Authority in 2006. which they did in good order. The elections were held in good order, and they won them. And that was actually another instance in which they were catastrophically successful, because their victory in that election spurred the siege that we have seen from 2007. So Paula has a lot of great insights into how, the relationship between the political and military wings of Hamas, basically, and how the political wing is in charge. When there are times that the political wing says we lay down the arms, we in order to participate in the elections or in the ceasefire, then the military wing obeys. And she also started to talk about how decisions get made in Hamas, the 4 central constituencies. And of course, Gaza is just one of these constituencies. And this goes back to something that Mohammed was saying, this idea that if you can just beat Hamas in Gaza, that's the end of the story. No. I mean, Hamas is also very influential in the West Bank. It's very influential in the diaspora, in Lebanon and Jordan, and internationally in Kuwait and Qatar, and it has a lot of political wind under its wings, let's say. So the second expert was Dr. Khalid Haroub, who is a Palestinian who teaches at Northwestern University in Qatar. And he's written a couple of books about Hamas as well. When we had that discussion, one of my main goals was to really elucidate and bring out the distinction between Hamas and ISIS, because for many people in the West, all these Islamic movements just seem the same. And, ISIS is really scary and nasty and sectarian and deadly. So, what are the differences between Hamas and ISIS? Then in the third one, we had Dr. Jeroen Gunning, who is Dutch. And I love this conversation because Jeroen is one of the founders of an academic field called critical terrorism studies, which doesn't get much traction in this country, because this country, it's all about terrorism studies, and there's a lot of money in terrorism studies. You barely ever hear of critical terrorism studies. And Jeroen put this whole thing into a very useful kind of historical perspective, looking at the ways that fading colonial empires have sought to demonize the national liberation movements, whether we're talking Vietnam or Algeria or Mozambique or anywhere. That actually you get a lot of violence at the end of colonial movements and a lot of demonization. Then our fourth expert was Mouin Rabbani, who is a really smart Palestinian analyst, and he talked about the relationship between Hamas and the other Palestinian movements. He talked about the relationship between Hamas and other regional movements. And then the fifth one was Dr. Azam Tamimi, who is a kind of I want to say a Muslim Brotherhood / Hamas elder statesman at this point. He runs a TV channel out of London. But he's known all the historic leaders of Hamas, by the way, all of whom have been assassinated by the Israelis, including most recently Ismail Haniyeh, who was elected as the prime minister of the PA back in 2006, and Yahya Sinwar. I met Haniyeh right after the elections in 2006. I was able to interview him, met him later as well. But so having Dr. Azam talk about how he saw things developing was really interesting. One of the themes also that ran through many of our conversations, we had a good conversation with Dr. Azam about this, is Hamas's views of women, very different, let me say, from the views that ISIS holds of women. I mean, I've met 2 of the 4 elected women parliamentarians, one of whom, Dr. Jamila Shanti, became a minister in the Hamas government and was assassinated by the Israelis last year. And, you know, there are many ways in which Hamas's views of women is really interesting. Like when they were building a lot of mosques in Gaza, they would build them with 2 floors so that the men could pray on one floor and the women could pray on the other floor. The idea of having communal women's prayer was something that was kind of important to them. And they were very supportive of women in education and public life. So that's kind of a quick digest of some of the high points of the book. I don't know how many of your questions I've answered, maybe 2 of them, but I was working hard.
Thank you, Helena, particularly for the methodology, the four or the 5 people, expert that you spoke to. Maybe later on you can expand more on the 2017, because it's very controversial and very much there is a gap between 1988 and 2017, and people tend to skip that and just dismiss it. So maybe we can talk about that. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me? All right. One is tempted to say that the situation with Hamas is not unique. In almost every liberation struggle, the oppressors would label the resistance movement terrorist. And in almost every case, once the liberation movement succeeds, that title gets dropped. Whether you're talking about the ANC in South Africa, the Algerians, the Viet Cong, the IRA in Ireland, or the PLO, yes, they would have to sort of ameliorate, moderate their positions, their documents, but also their behavior, because once they're a government, they can't run around doing the same things they did when they are a liberation movement. And those who simply don't want to talk to them, we have seen in Syria. The United States is willing to talk to somebody who is Al-Qaeda, just 2 or 3 years ago, and to deal with him as a politician, newly polished, yeah. I'd like to submit to you that the case of Hamas is different in 2 major ways from all of these other cases, where one can argue, as you did in the beginning, that you have to make peace with your enemies, you have to know who they are, you have to talk to them, you negotiate with your enemies, not with your friends. You shouldn't totally boycott them and refuse to talk to them. The 2 basic differences with Hamas are, number 1, that the demonization of Hamas was a very deliberate and successful political tool that made Hamas itself to appear to be so evil, so demonic, that even those who want to support Palestinians were all saying we have to agree that we have to get rid of Hamas. That any and every crime, including genocide, including apartheid, including the utter destruction of the entire Gaza, the entire forcible transfer of the people in Gaza, anything and everything can be justified if you say, I am linking it to Hamas. Hamas. Building can be destroyed. Hundreds of people killed deliberately, knowingly, because there is a Hamas person involved there. So that instead of the old rules that you go against combatants and not against civilians or non-combatants, instead of making a distinction between those who are carrying arms and those who are not, Now, anybody who can be even claimed to be associated with Hamas becomes a legitimate target. Even an organization like UNRWA, who has 30,000 employees, and of course some of them are probably politically aligned with Hamas. If you can show that 12 of its employees were in fact members of Hamas, or you can allege that they are, you don't have to prove anything, then the whole organization, UNRWA, becomes illegitimate and needs to be replaced or displaced. So this utter demonization that goes beyond saying they're the bad guys. It says that they are so evil. They are the Nazis. They are the utter evil that cannot be tolerated in any way, shape, or form. And so a lot of very progressive people were saying, oh, wait a minute, they're not all Hamas. They didn't all vote for Hamas. So therefore they should be spared. As if somehow that also reinforces the idea that Hamas itself is evil and is demonic and can and should be attacked. So this is one major difference between how Hamas is treated and how the PLO and all these other groups are being treated. The second difference is that in this country, as well as in much of Western Europe, there is now a legislative scheme whereby anybody who can be accused of being supporter of or sympathetic to Hamas becomes a criminal, so that it is possible to close down organizations, dismiss faculty or students, take away their visas, prohibit demonstrations, prohibit the use of certain words from the river to the sea, if they can somehow be said to be associated with Hamas. In fact, there is now legislation, I don't know if it has been passed yet or not, and under the current regime it may not be necessary to pass it. It can be done by executive order, where there's a new category called terrorist supporting organizations, TSAs or TS associations, where if you think that a particular organization, if you can allege that a particular organization belongs to that category of supporting terrorism, therefore, and they mean by that Hamas, of course, not just any kind of terrorism, then you can take away their 501c3 status, their tax-exempt status. In fact, many people, I think, were reluctant to even appear on this panel because they were afraid that merely appearing on a panel like this or attending a place like this, and I want to congratulate all of you for daring to come and listen to this panel, could be jeopardizing your career, your reputation, your status under this government. In fact, I'll be honest to you, when I first decided to come, I thought, how do I qualify and explain my presence here? The fact that I felt the need to tell everybody that I don't support Hamas. I'm a Christian, for one thing. I'm a secularist, for another. I don't believe in any religious. I'm a pacifist. I'm a nonviolent, for a third thing. And yet I still think it is absolutely essential and important that Hamas be involved, be engaged, be part of the process. How could you possibly talk about the future of Gaza or the future of Palestine without dealing with Hamas? As a political group, as an ideology, and as a group that has won elections, that has members in parliament, that has institutions, and that has appealed to many people. So this is the one remark I wanted to make, is that the case of Hamas is very important. Very important that we engage with Hamas, that we lift this taboo against talking to Hamas, that just like with the PLO, it was the churches, it was academic institutions, it was civil society that helped the US first and Israel later to deal with the PLO. And many people paid the price. Andrew Young was dismissed from his position at the United Nations for even talking to Zuhdi Tarazi, the representative of the PLO at the UN. But right now, and I made this argument, by the way, I made all these arguments before October 2023, that the churches need to take a bold position of engaging with Hamas. Doesn't mean you agree with them, doesn't mean you support them, but you need to engage with them. And you need to bring them along, and you need to bring them into a political process that deals with peace and that deals with justice for the Palestinians. But you did not come here to hear me. You came here to hear Helen and to talk about this book, which is so, so important, that people would understand Hamas is not this demon that need this absolute evil that you cannot touch, that you cannot talk to. It's a political movement. It's a political party. Yes, it believes in, as in engaged in armed struggle, but it has been willing, as you said in the past, to even drop that in order to engage in the political process. For about a year and a half before the elections, Hamas totally refrained from carrying out any military resistance against Israel. It was only Fatah that continued to be fighting during that period and doing activities against Israel. So Hamas can, in fact, be engaged with. They have changed their documents, their constitution. They have been willing to engage with things that even they don't necessarily like. But they said, if that's the way the Palestinians go, we are willing to go along with it. So Hamas has been a very flexible movement. In my capacity as an attorney in Israeli military courts, I have represented many Hamas people. As I mentioned in my book, I only met one person who was a fanatic, and he wasn't even a member of Hamas. In fact, he didn't think Hamas were even Muslims. They're not really good Muslims, because he was on a totally different plane. But Hamas people are ordinary people, just like Fatah people are ordinary people. Some of them are nice, some of them not so nice. Some of them are very militant and very extremist, and some of them are moderate and willing to engage and willing to discuss. So I think this country, it is very important, and we cannot expect it to come from the top. Civil society, churches, academics, institutions must begin to break this taboo, but if they do, they may have to pay a price for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you. Maybe later on you can also, about something connected to both what you said regarding Hamas, because in your book, Beyond Two States, I was wondering, how do Hamas look at something like this, which also connect to question I asked you about the October 2017, the revision of the 1988. But before you both respond to that, I want to get people 3 or 4 comments, and then we'll give you a chance to incorporate your responses also. All right? Floor is yours. We have about half an hour. We can ask a challenging question, please. So imagine you are in the shoes of the other side. Yes, Mubarak is honored to ask us a first question, and then we'll move to the back.
My question is that many times we say Hamas, Hamas, Hamas. We have to say Palestinian, Palestinian, Palestinians, because they are part of Palestine, and that's important. And whatever the Israeli try to put names and adjectives and things like that, we should not follow what the Israeli wants. We should make our own things about Hamas, one thing. The other thing which was important is that meeting the leadership of Hamas when they have been fighting and quarreling with the PLO, Hamas said, yes, we are part of Palestinians. We don't need to fight with the PLO or with the Palestinian Authority. And we went back to the Palestinian Authority, and the Palestinian Authority refused to talk to Hamas or to make peace with Hamas to get the Palestinians together. So as much as you were mentioning how flexible they are always willing to be part of the Palestinian family.
Thank you. Please state your name. This was Mubarak Awad. He's the first American to be formally expelled from Palestine, Israel in 1988 as part of the leader of the Palestinian National Intifada, one of the founders of the nonviolence resistance in the mid-80s. Yes, please.
Oh, yeah, sure. Hi, my name is Khouri. I'm a freshman here at American University. Thank you for coming here and speaking to us. So actually, this is my first semester on campus. I was abroad my first semester, but what is your advice specifically, seeing how universities might be concealing, to your comment, like not being able to even say the word Hamas, not having any empathy or sympathy for Palestinians and what they've endured? And so how do you combat institutions, schools possibly, that are trying to control our conversations that we're having in and outside of the classroom about simply having humanity and empathy, and to your point and to your book said, just understanding? Because how can we solve problems without sitting down and understanding them?
Thank you, thank you. We look forward to be in touch with you, and we're happy that you're a freshman, so we look for some more years of interaction with you. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, my name is Kareen. I'm a sophomore here at American studying Arab World Studies and International Affairs. I just wanted to ask, how do you think you could get people to care about Palestine and like humanizing Hamas, like civil society? I know you said it can't come from the top because we know the US government isn't interested in understanding Hamas, it seems. So, I mean, I've seen posts from students here saying, like, why should we care about what's happening in that part of the world, or why should we care about other people? So I just wanted to ask how we get people to actually care when it doesn't directly involve them.
Thank you. Take one more note, and then we'll get some responses. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. It's such an important and profound
I am Barbara Wien.
discussion. I'm Barbara Wien. I used to teach here. I'm now retired from American University. I had actually a few questions. I'll try to be very brief. But over the many years that I've been following the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I noted that there were many, many intellectuals, Palestinian poets, Palestinian medical doctors, musicians, moderates, who were all assassinated by Israel. And does a list of this nature exist anywhere? Has anybody ever documented all of the very reasonable Palestinian leaders who tried to lead nonviolent movements like Mubarak did, all of the intellectual figureheads who were trying to lead the Palestinian people, all of them assassinated? And this is also a question for you. In the annals of peace research, have we ever known the negotiating party to assassinate their counterparts and the mediator, as they did? I think you may have mentioned this in your remarks. So from my perspective, all of the people that could have led a countervailing Palestinian nonviolent movement were all assassinated. Does a body of literature exist anywhere where I could find all those names in one place? And my other question was, I've been told and I've read over the years that Mossad helps stimulate the creation of Hamas, and I don't know if that's valid, if that's true, but they were trying to countervail Arafat So they tried to create or radicalize a different movement. Could you dispel that myth if it's not true?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Barbara. Very good. The mic is yours. You can. We have one on silencing an institution, what to deal with that. One on how to humanize and get people to be cared. A history of Israel, 1960s and 70s, supporting the creation of Hamas.
Okay, I can't answer all the questions, but the question about like why people should care, I think what we saw, let's say, from October the 8th of 2023 to January 20th of 2025 in this country was, from my perspective, an unprecedented outpouring of support in this country for Palestinians in Gaza. I mean, you know, I came to this country in 1982. That's when I started writing my book on the PLO here at Georgetown. And while I was doing that, the Israelis were bombing the shit out of Beirut. Yeah. And all the people that I had, like the whole community that I was a part of there was under the Israeli bombardment. And in this country, the so-called progressive left was all rooting for the Palestinians. Even Jane Fonda was sitting on an IDF tank outside of Beirut, you know, rooting for the Israelis. Yeah. Yeah. Her husband, Tom Hayden, was running for Congress at the time. I mean, you know, but the left, that's where the left was. And actually at that point, the left in Israel was much more active, especially after the revelation of the massacres at Sabra and Shatila refugee camps. So what has happened in the intervening 40, whatever, however many years, is that the left in this country has shifted significantly, not completely. And obviously there's a lot of older, more well-established people in the Democratic Party who have deep ties to Israel, but the grassroots, especially in the Jewish community, the younger generation, it's very, very different from how it was in 1982. Meantime, in Israel, you've had almost the reverse happen. I mean, there is essentially no longer a peace movement in Israel. In 1982, you know, when they were protesting the massacres at Sabra and Shatila, 1 million Israelis took to the streets. They brought down the Begin government. They had, you know, they forced the establishment of a commission that said that Ariel Sharon should never again exercise national office. You know, that was something in Israel. We have not had a movement analogous to that in this country, but last year there was a significant movement. Now, I think, you know, what has happened since Donald Trump came into office has left everybody just like, oh my God, you know, what is happening in this country? And the way that Elon Musk, who's a big friend of Netanyahu's, it needs to be said, you know, is just going after all the social programs in this country. And Trump is about to, you know, give another $8 billion worth of arms to Israel. I mean, there's a heck of a lot to worry about, not least, you know, that Elon Musk's goons have stolen everybody's social security number. They're going to be axing social programs all around the country. So maybe it's going to be for a little while hard to regain the popular grassroots support for Palestine that we saw a lot last year, which maybe gives us all a good chance to do some education and have like reading circles, really delve into the issues in a way that we couldn't last year so easily when all the action was in the streets. And, you know, God knows what's going to happen in the next 3 months in Gaza. But I'm sure the movement is not going to go away. Okay, so Mohammed really wants me to talk about the 2017 revision of the 1988 Charter. So the 1988 Charter was produced when all the leaders of Hamas were in jail, essentially. But it was produced not without any real process of consultation. Since then, Hamas's procedures for internal consultation have become much more developed. But the way that Dr. Azam Tamimi described it to us was that it was just like some random school teacher in a refugee camp somewhere, came up with the 1988 Charter, and then nobody could disavow it. But the 2017 revision was the result of a lot of consultation, and it's much more nuanced. The 1988 version has a lot of anti-Semitic tropes in it. Well, basically saying, that if you can't trust Jews and they will, I can't remember. We actually have it. We have both of them in the book. So one of the people who was helping me with editing the book said, you should make like a table and draw out the comparisons and contrasts between them. I said, no, let the reader do the work. So anyway, that's all I can say to you guys. You do the work. So in 2017, crucially, they came close to, well, they said, if the Palestinian people as a whole accept an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel, the two-state, then if the Palestinian people as a whole accept that, we will go along with it, which was a real innovation. And it provides a chink of opening through which a diplomatic process, if we had a government in this country that was interested in a two-state solution, which we have not had for many, many years, I want to say, then this could provide an opening into that discussion. So there are a lot of differences. Like I say, you have to go and read the book and do the work yourselves on the differences between 1988 and 2017. Very, very significant differences. This question of, did the Mossad create or support the creation of Hamas? What I want to say, because I grew up in England, and when I was growing up in the 1950s, divide and rule was how you kept an empire. India and Pakistan, North Cyprus and South Cyprus. Just make sure that people, Arabs and Jews in Palestine. Divide and rule is how you keep an empire, how you try and keep an empire going. So, of course, the Israelis were doing, PLO versus Fatah. And, if it seemed like they were under a lot of pressure from Clinton or George W. Bush or whatever to do a deal with Arafat, then they would do things that would undercut Arafat and strengthen Hamas. I mean, everybody there, I want to say, really understands that that's what's going on. So it is true that for a number of years, and I can't remember exactly when this started, Netanyahu in particular, who fancies himself as a master of this game, allowed a lot of Qatari money to go into Gaza. And Qatar is very close to the Hamas leadership. So you even had
2014 to 16.
Yeah, you had this really great Palestinian analyst, Tariq Bakaoni, who wrote a book called Hamas Contained. And it came out, I want to say, in late 2022. And, he said, it looks like the Israelis have really succeeded in buying off Hamas at the same time as they have undermined Arafat. But, Hamas Contained was possibly the worst title he could have chosen for his book, although he's bringing out another version of it. And in 2021, for example, Palestinian Islamic Jihad wanted to activate the military conflict across the Gaza border. And Hamas intervened to stop them from doing that and actually arrested or maybe even killed some Islamic Jihad people to keep the border quiet because they had the longer-term plan. They had the, Al-Aqsa flood plan, which we saw later on. So, yeah, there is the divide and rule. It does happen, but right now it's not there at all for a number of reasons. One is that Hamas has emerged a lot stronger in Palestinian public opinion than Fatah. And Fatah right now in the West Bank is actively cracking down on the resistance in Jenin and Tulkarem, hand in hand with the Israeli military, which is what the PA has become. It's become a kind of capo force within the concentration camps.
Thank you. Thank you, definitely. Yes, please.
I'd like to address two questions. First, about assassinations. The best book that I think exists is a book called Rise Up and Kill First by John somebody. It talks about how assassination is used as a deliberate policy of Israeli tool of Israeli policy. The second, I want to address the questions that were raised about how do students resist? How do you continue to exercise your First Amendment rights? And the answer is that right now, centering on the question of Palestine, but potentially extending to all other activism, have been a number of deliberate policies by administrators, by funders, and by government actors that clearly violates First Amendment rights, freedom of association, academic freedom, those things that we always took for granted. I mean, you think of a university as one place where you are free to discuss all sorts of ideas, even ideas that you cannot discuss outside the university. I have to tell you the story. I was the chairman of the Board of Trustees of Bethlehem Bible College, and I was supposed to give a speech at their graduation. Bethlehem Bible College is a conservative, evangelical Bible college. And I told the students, I said, you are living here under Israeli occupation. You are living here in a very conservative society. But within these walls of Bethlehem Bible College, you are free. In fact, you are encouraged to ask any question, to discuss anything, to discuss different religions, to discuss different philosophies, to question the existence of God, to question scripture because of something called academic freedom. And your professors will not only permit you, they will encourage you to engage in these discussions. Outside these walls, it may be difficult in society and under Israeli occupation. But here, there is something called academic freedom. When I come to this country and I hear that at elite universities, at Harvard, at Columbia, at Yale, here, that it is not possible to discuss certain things because they make some students feel uncomfortable. Give me a break. You're supposed to feel uncomfortable. You're coming here to be challenged. So the fight for academic freedom and freedom of speech and First Amendment and freedom of association and the ability to discuss things is going to be your battle in the coming years, especially under this administration, not only with respect to Hamas and Palestine, but with respect to anything. Right now, all these liberties and freedoms are under attack. And you really have to fight for democracy and freedom in every generation. And this is your battle.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So just to build on for those two questions, humanizing is to connect with people as a human, highlight the human, the common humanity even in this disaster. And I just invite our freshmen, the first one who asked also, you'll find many people on this campus as well who are in solidarity with some of the views you express. And one of the first things is to seek them among students, faculty, staff, and you might have, and I'm sure you'll have, support and encouragement in case your voice is threatened or being silenced. So I do encourage you to do that. And thank you for coming here. And alumni, thank you. And retired faculty as well. I'm going to tell you a short story about this issue of Mossad and Hamas. In 83, 84, 85, 86, I was with the Palestinian Student Union in Jerusalem. And we used to go to help Bir Zayt students. I never told this publicly, but I will say it even now in camera. And we will go, they will come help us in election, and we will go to help them in election. And Marwan Barghouthi was in the head of the Palestinian Student Association in Bir Zayt. So we'll do Bir Zayt and then Najah and also Beit Lahem, and they will come help us. And I witnessed that personally when the Israeli military during the night, the week before the election and the night of the election, they will come, and also after, they will come and arrest the Fatah, the communists, the PFLP, the DFLP, and they will leave Hamas activists or Islamic Brotherhood activists during that time. And that systematically in 83, 84, 85, 86, that's 4 years, we have seen that done where, not sure deliberately that there is an agreement between them, no, but deliberately the Israeli were practicing divide and rule in the student movement and giving a free pass to Palestinian activists who were affiliated with the Islamic movement. And also Netanyahu allowing $30 million, I think, to be passed to Hamas in the containment policy between 2016, I think, and 14 and 16. And also he stated number of years, and also there's a call for investigation committee against Netanyahu for this containment policy between 2007 and until 2023, where he argued that the role of Israel was to prevent reconciliation between the two of you. I'm going to take the moderator hat again.
Yeah, Netanyahu actually said it. He says, if you really want to prevent a Palestinian state, you have to strengthen Hamas.
Yes.
I need to do it. Those who tell me I have to act against Hamas don't understand what I'm doing.
That's right.
This is my tool for preventing a Palestinian state by encouraging Hamas.
Karim, yes, please.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you.
I'm Karim Crow. I was with NI for a while. Jonathan raised a point which is very important, and I hope my question doesn't sound pessimistic, but the collusion or collaboration or whatever you want to call it of the American establishment and the Israeli military and cultural actions in the Middle East is beyond simple political support. It goes into complicity, legal and moral. And you know that the Central Command of the United States military is in very close collaboration with the Israeli Defense Forces in their targeting, and they share the satellite information for that on a daily basis. This is something, of course it was not unprecedented. For 9 years when Saudi Arabia and the UAE bombed the hell out of Yemen and killed hundreds of thousands of people, the same thing was going on. And those were American weapons, those jets, and the bombs were also USA made, right? So this is something that has been set up and is easily facilitating this type of activity, the genocide, which is going on. So I wonder, the other side of it, of course, is that Zionism is not just Jewish, it's very heavily Christian in this country. In fact, that's the real power of Zionism in the United States. 40 million, I don't know the numbers about the Bible-thumping people, the premillennial dispensationalist evangelicals. For those people who want to study religious movements, that's the technical term for Christian Zionists in America. And you should look into it. It's a rather weird cult. And then how can we today be realistic about trying to shift public view, get way into the political circles? You know that Congress has been bought by the Zionist lobby. You know that the mainstream media is simply a tool of the Zionist lobby. Everything else is alternative, and that's on the internet. But they can close you down from YouTube as well. You have to have another backup, like you have various other alternatives. The thing is that whatever event, every attempt to make some kind of shift in the way that people view Palestine and view the Israeli and Zionist actions in the Middle East will always be swamped by this, what some people identify as part of the deep state in this country, which is a very heavily pro-Zionist thing. And you can see that the way the Republicans have become more Zionist than Zionists. And you know what? A few decades ago, Republicans were anti-Semites, dyed in the wool. Okay. So I'm sorry to sound pessimistic, but I hope there's an answer to that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Actually, there is an answer. American policy is usually the result of a number of factors. And it is guided by centers of interest and centers of power, usually at the very top. But they all operate within a certain milieu. That is why the opinion of ordinary people counts. It does not immediately and directly influence things, but it creates the atmosphere through which policy needs to operate. Now, if there is enough of a groundswell, yes, it can have an impact, as we saw with the Vietnam War. But usually that's not the case. Usually what happens is that those who are at the top will determine things, but they need to have a certain cover. They need to work within a certain milieu. They cannot go totally against what everybody knows and thinks and believes. That is why all the work that you and everybody here has been doing on behalf of Palestinians and Palestinian rights is extremely important. It has not had an impact on the top 1%. But when the students and the faculty eventually will have an impact, because right now, the administrators, the funders, the top 1%, the presidents continue to hold the strings of power. But when their interest changes, they will change also, and all the work that you have done in the meanwhile will come into fruition.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Before I give you the floor, we have only because 5 minutes or for a few minutes. Nancy, you had a question or comment. And then, Helen, you can respond.
A question, and it's primarily for Helena, I think. I'm Nancy Nye, many, many hats, spouse of Mubarak Awad. But I last went to Gaza, I think about 10 years ago. And you talked about it being a concentration camp. I always described it as being a maximum security prison because of the difficulty of getting in and out. And I was overwhelmed on that visit by the change I saw in Gaza. My first trip to Gaza was actually with Jonathan. In 1981, I had gone to Ramallah to be the head of the Friends School, and Jonathan said, you need to see Gaza. And imagine, we drove from Ramallah to Gaza and had a picnic and went swimming in the Mediterranean. Wow. Those were the days, right, Jonathan? When I went back in 2014, 2015, I couldn't believe the difference. At the universities, I saw so many young girls in niqab, completely covered. And I remember saying to my driver that day, this is not the Gaza that I have known through the years. And I said to my driver, is this the influence of Hamas, who had been in power for some years by then? And the driver said, oh, no, no, no. Hamas is very moderate. Hamas he kept using the word moderate. He said the radicalization of Gaza has been by the extremist groups. Can you help me understand what the driver was saying to me?
Up to a point. I mean, I would say your driver was being very diplomatic. Hamas itself has many different streams inside. I mean, I've sat with, women. First of all, nearly everybody in Gaza wears a hijab, if that's, if that's your way of measuring things. And some of them also wear the face covering, the niqab. I mean, of the Hamas women MPs that I interviewed, some of them, I mean, there are 4 of them, but I know that 2 of them wear niqab and 2 of them don't wear niqab. And there's lively discussion. I think, it's a very crowded society, obviously. We're talking about pre-genocide Gaza. And for women to be in the public sphere, you have to be very, cautious, because you're rubbing up against people all the time. It's so goddamn, crowded. And for your, in order not to stain the honor of your family, you cover up however much you think you need to cover up. I think there are more extreme political trends. Obviously, Palestinian Islamic Jihad is harder line, but they work so closely together. And then there's the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which is avowedly secular. So, it's the resistance. The resistance is, they have a joint operations room, they have joint political discussions, decisions. So I think focusing on, how extremely Islamist are people is maybe not the right question. I want to also come back to the previous questioner, Karim, who was looking at the overwhelming power of Christian Zionism. I do have to note that being pro-Israeli is quite congruent with being anti-Semitic. Yeah. I mean, anti-Semitism is not the same as anti-Zionism. And a lot of people, who are anti-Semitic, want to see the Jews leave our society and go to Israel. They want to see the second coming, which will involve the Jews all getting taken up into who knows what and converted into Christians. So it's a very different thing. But I am much more optimistic over, let's say, the 10-year time frame than I think you are. Not only for the reasons that Jonathan gave, but also because I've been studying the global balance of power so intensely for so many years. And, in 1990, the U.S. was just, at the end of the Cold War, the U.S. was unparalleled. It was the unipolar moment. We don't have a unipolar moment anymore. We have a very rapid and uneven and, to me, fascinating series of shifts toward multipolarity. And so there is a united, one can almost say at this point, a united white supremacist colonial movement that is both our government and the Israeli government joined at the hip, and also the UK government to a certain extent, which is also providing a lot of intel help to the Israeli. Yeah, so you can think of this as a kind of white supremacist international that has a very important outpost in Israel, but the world is completely against. You know, I have a book company. I publish books by Palestinians. The interest in our books is massive. A Japanese edition of the Gaza Kitchen Cookbook just about to come out. I mean, it's amazing, you know. We have friends who were, you know, who do a lot of work with ASEAN. ASEAN is 100% pro-Palestine. The BRICS, you know, strongly pro-Palestine. So, you know, the idea that things in our country are looking really dire from many points of view, I'm just looking forward to the moment when the global majority, that is the 87% of humanity that is not white, is actually able to get its act together and rein in the power of the white supremacist international. Gaza, I said that Gaza has always been the crucible for the Palestinian liberation movement. I think right now Gaza is the crucible for global transformation, and we have to be part of that.
Thank you, thank you. We really have to finish. Thank you. This is a great response for those who are looking for stories of hope and suffering from the Washington symptom, living here in this place. It's okay. Yeah. Thank you. I want to thank Abdul Hadi, who's our TA for the Abdul Aziz Saeed Chair, and also Michael, Nonviolence International, for all the help, and also Mohammed Uthman, our our colleague now, not assistant anymore. So our colleague also. Thank you all for coming here. And there are the books outside.
And Jonathan's books to sell, and please take copies of our flyer.
And the books there, and we have a credit card to take also, and we can take your money in checks in any way you would like. Thank you all, and thank you.